So, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
dive right into it. Very good.
Yeah, let's go.
It's snowing in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
How
Hmm.
weird do you want to have it? Welcome to the Food Forest cast. In season 5, we've moved past the pioneering phase and are looking ahead. Hundreds of hectares of food forest have been added. The first harvests are getting underway and short supply chains are starting to emerge. Is this the start of an agricultural revolution? Or is there still a world to be won? In this season, we draw inspiration from the ultimate strategist of the food forest, the fungus. If we are the underground mycelium, what is needed now to make a leap in scale?
What a beautiful question. So, this is the first time we are doing a show in English. In Dutch, the name of our show is actually a contraction of the words food forest and podcast. So, that makes it the Voedselboscast. But when we do the same word joke in English, it spells food forest cast. It becomes a word that sort of sounds like we are looking into the future. That fits with this podcast perfectly, as we are searching for strategies for a healthy food production, and we see that planting trees is unmistakably part of that movement going forward. But like trees, humans are very dependent on fungi just to be able to live. They were here first, so to speak. So for the people who are unfamiliar with mycelium, it's often called the wood wide web of fungi, the thin filaments called hyphae, which connect everything in the underground of the forest. They are the big suppliers, traders, and cleaners of the forest. So we can see this wood wide web actually as a platform from which many other life forms are built upon. And in many ways, fungi do things fundamentally different than we humans do. That inspired us to take the mycelium as a guideline for bottom-up innovation, as a good parallel between what they do and what maybe we should be doing. So this season we are taking the strategies of mycelium as a common thread through the podcast and ask ourselves, what would mycelium do? So that said, let's go on with the podcast.
Yes, and today's guest is nobody less, we would say in Dutch, than Martin Crawford, the pioneer in forest gardening and one of the people who has done a lot to bring tree-based food systems into the public conversation. His oldest own food forest plot is more than 30 years old, and that makes him one of the earliest pioneers in food forest, or as he then called it, forest gardening. Through decades of practical work, teaching and writing, he is still inspiring growers far beyond the UK. Martin, very welcome to this podcast.
Thank you.
Yes,
Pleasure to be here.
yes. And do you think the same about mycelium? Do you think it's the supplier, the cleaner, the basis of a food forest?
I do. I mean, when I'm doing tours around my food forests, I quite often say, of course, what you can't see are probably the most important organisms of all, which
Yeah.
are the fungi and their mycelium underneath everything. You know, they're the fundamental support, basically. So yeah, really important.
Yes. And do you think people know a bit more about that? Also, the connection with our own internal microbiome, so like the mycelium and the microbiome. More and more people are interested in it and want to know about it. Compared to 30 years ago, is there a change?
Oh, a big change, I think. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have heard about the Wood Wide Web, as you just mentioned, and also, you know, the microbiome within us. So people are a lot more aware of the importance of fungi.
Yeah.
And if we're looking back those 20, 30 years, and from that moment until now, what do people still see completely wrong?
Those are the prepared questions, you know.
Yeah. Well, uh, it's interesting because people who come my way, are already somewhat interested in the subject, and so they've usually heard of mycelium in some way or other, and so on. But there is there's always a sort of risk of us thinking the whole world
Mm.
is changing.
Yeah.
Whereas actually the world of food forestry is really quite small.
Yeah.
And outside that, a lot of the world isn't changing very much. So certainly, you know, mainstream farming in Britain is still very conservative, and even to get them to plant a few trees in a field is quite, you have to persuade them a lot to do
Mhm.
that. So there's a long way to go still.
Yes, but you know, in the Netherlands, but I live in France, so here too, farmers are conscious that their soils are getting less and less fertile and less healthy, but they can't change their frame of mind in a way to look for the solution. You know, this that famous Einstein phrase: the mind that created the problem is not the mind that can create the solution.
Mm.
That's where I think they don't make that step. Is that your feeling too? That they are conscious, but that they don't want to really change because they can't see it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And that's the real value of sites that have been around for a while that they can go and
Yeah,
look at,
yeah,
you know, and actually see what's happening with their own eyes. I think that's so important. I mean, obviously, you know, myself and other people have written various books and so on, and books are great and videos are great, but actually nothing is as good as seeing with your own eyes in front of you what's
yeah,
going on.
Mm.
yeah. Yeah, we do courses and you know, yesterday was the start of the new annual training with us. Did it happen again, Frank? You were there. That
Yeah.
people walk through the food forest of Wouter van Eck. That's our first lesson. We dive deep
Yeah.
directly, and that something changes in them.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah,
the excursion into the field is the moment when people start feeling it. And the combination of knowing and feeling is maybe the thing that's happening then. And that is different than being in a class or reading a newspaper. That's, a different kind of consciousness, if you know what I mean.
yeah.
Mm.
So,
So we
yeah,
need more food forests. We agree upon that.
yeah,
Yours
Yeah.
is now over 30 years old. That's something I've been thinking about. My food forest is I'm 3. That's in the Netherlands we have this joke where we meet each other and then we say the age of our food forest. So I
Uh-huh.
say I'm 3, and my food forest, everything still looks like, well, is it ever going to happen? And that's the problem of 3. Your food forest is like 30 years old and maybe so far from that meadow or field where it first started that people can't even make the link between it. I think that's happening with the food forest from Wouter van Eck now too. That's 12, 15, that it's become so much a forest that you can't imagine it never was there.
Yeah, and that's possibly an issue because people can be a bit overwhelmed,
Yeah.
thinking, well, how on earth do I get to this? It's
Yes.
like,
Yes.
I've only got a field of grass or whatever. Um, and you know, one way that I've addressed that is actually to have started younger forest gardens. So people can see the old one, and then they can go and see much younger ones as well, where planting is still in progress, even in some of them, the underplanting. Um, and I think both those are really important. So it's important that younger forest gardens are still available and still there for people to see, because they're much more relatable
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
where they're starting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I thought so too, because I don't see Wouter's Food Forest every year anymore. I only see it occasionally. And then I see
Mm.
suddenly, whoa, it's so much more a forest now than a couple of years ago that you can't, you know, he shows this picture of these barren fields and of small little trees, but you can't believe it anymore. But you
Mm.
have just also for the listeners, you have this very old food forest. And then now you have with your agroforestry foundation, you also have a bigger plots where you have things neatly in rows and much more in an agricultural fashion, isn't it? Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, on our newer site, which is 14 years old, we've got two smaller forest gardens. So our oldest forest garden is about a hectare or so, and we have two smaller forest gardens. Size is also something that people can find overwhelming. You know, the people that come my way, you know, are thinking of making food forests from tiny scale, little back garden scale, up to many hectares. And so there's a big range of scales. And if you're thinking of making a very small food forest, then even a 1 hectare food forest that's 30 years old can seem very overwhelming in terms of the size and so on. So I wanted to make some smaller ones. So we have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old smaller food forest on our newer site. And the 9-year-old one is still being underplanted. It's about half underplanted, and the rest is trees, still with grass underneath. It all started as grass. So that's very valuable for people to be able to see the underplanting still going on, because actually, certainly in my experience, that's where people start to have some problems. It's not so much in the tree planting, it's in the underplanting and how to manage that layer and how to cope with the weeds you might get in that layer and so on.
It's my problem too.
So I think it's really valuable for people to see that. So I'm not rushing to underplant that youngest forest garden, because I still want people to be able to see it. At some point, of course, it will get underplanted, and then I suppose I'll have to start another one.
Yeah, what a problem.
And so you're talking about the food forest as a demonstration idea. How are they becoming? Are they becoming a serious agricultural model yet, do you think?
They are. I mean, it's not. None of my food forests have been designed to be commercial, to be commercial producers of food. So that's not what I've designed them for. But certainly other people are designing food forests, and you'll know well, particularly in the Netherlands, there's some big food forests being designed and planted with much more commercial aims. So I think that's definitely a possibility. Yeah.
You create show garden, in fact, yours on your place.
In effect, I mean, I do want them to be productive as well. Because they are for, well, as you say, they're like show gardens. They are there because I want to show a lot of people around them, and so I want to maximize diversity. So have a lot of different plants, so I can show the maximum number of different plants I can fit in. Whereas, of course, if you're going down a more commercial route, then there's always a trade-off there. The more diverse it is, possibly the more complex harvesting is. It all depends on the design, of course.
And sales.
And so you
more
might want to limit
sales. Yeah.
you might want to limit diversity to an extent. There'll be trade-offs there, because you'll be limiting you'll be limiting the kind of biological functioning in a way by limiting diversity as well. So it's a fine line where you draw that. But yeah, so that might well look different to what I'm doing.
So if we take the mycelium here, the fungus, and how the fungus would operate, the fungus is very strategic in its decisions and how it's performing. So it actually decides what to do, but it doesn't have a central brain. That's very interesting. So how do you go upon maybe thinking about a strategy for a food forest, thinking about it not having a brain? It is on like mycelium, it's all over, but not centralized.
Yes, that's an interesting one. I think one strand of the answer to that, perhaps, is from a designer point of view, is sure, you have to do some design to start with, but actually then you can step back a little bit and work with the land much more rather than imposing your will. And that generally works much better, because the land knows what it's suitable for, as it were. And sometimes, our desires to grow this or to grow that there, when actually they're not well suited to that bit of land. It's that as one strand, as I say, of an answer to that question about how we take inspiration from mycelium.
It is interesting that you're saying the land knows. What is knowing then?
We're going to go deep into philosophy. Frank is reading all kind of books now on mycelium.
Yeah, but it's an interesting question, because
how do you know? Yeah.
How do you know what the land knows? Yeah.
Looking at it.
Yeah, how do you know what the land knows?
Yeah.
Well, as you get to know a piece of land better and better, then you can see from what you've already done, you know, what is working and what is not working so well. And so the land shows you basically, you know, what sort of plants will grow well, what sort of plants are struggling maybe. Um, I guess the interesting thing is that dynamic between, you know, the designer or the owner and the land, and you have to take ego out of the
Mm.
equation, and not everybody can do that.
No, probably not.
Ego is an interesting thing, and causes most of the problems in the world from my perspective, mostly male ego. And actually, we still, however much an expert you think you are, we still need to be humble because we don't know everything. Of
Mm.
course, we don't know everything. And certainly, if you're starting a project on a new bit of land that you don't know that well, you're probably going to make lots of mistakes because you don't know the land, you know,
Well,
because it takes a while.
it's not only mistakes. It's also if the land is very bad quality, then it has to go to a certain process of healing, which the land knows too. It's something you have to work with. So in the beginning you have a lot of plagues of mice and how do you see these horrible slugs and snails.
Mm,
In France you have less slugs and snails, but you have a lot of mice. But now, the big birds are coming in. And so after 3 years, I, for the first year, have a year where mice are, well, they're there, but they're not everywhere anymore. So those kind of things are also something you have to listen to or work with in a way. I feel the same thing. It's a mycelium approach, maybe,
yeah,
which is a networking approach or a working together approach. I don't know. That's how I feel it too. The more I do that, and because that's what we are students from Wouter van Eck, and one of the first things he said is, "Don't fight the plagues. They are part of a system that's healing itself." And so a lot of people in the Netherlands are just waiting till the slugs and snails will disappear, and a lot of them can't. They just can't. They need to do something. So
yeah,
that's the human thing. We want to have it neat. We want to have it in lines. We want to have it, but the mycelium doesn't care about lines. Doesn't care about neatness.
sure,
Yeah.
sure, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's our need.
And going back to our newer site as well as well as those
Yeah.
forest gardens, as you mentioned, I do have some lines of trees, lines of hazelnuts, for example, in a very much simpler agroforestry system, not a food. You wouldn't call it. Well, I wouldn't call it a food forest, and that's because me and our organisation we're interested in propagating all forms of agroforestry, not just food forestry. And food forestry is my main interest, um, but going back to farmers and farmers being fairly conservative, they can relate to some lines of trees in a field much
Yeah.
easier than relating to a diverse food forest. So I see that as a way in to get them interested in trees just to begin with. Maybe a
Yeah.
food forest will come later, but initially something simpler maybe is the way to get them interested.
Mm.
Yeah.
How,
That's completely true.
how should growers think differently about yield in a food forest compared to an annual agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically, how I describe it is that in a food forest, we're not trying to maximize the yield of any one particular crop. We're trying to maximize the overall yield of everything together. Um, but also, and I'm sure this will come up later, in terms of the climate crisis, one of the responses to that in terms of food forestry is to maximize the diversity. And if you maximize your diversity, you're not necessarily maximizing yield, but what you're probably doing is maximizing a sustainable yield,
Hmm.
or a resilient yield, if you like, depending
Yeah.
on what's going to happen in the future. And so I sometimes have long discussions about yield, and in a strict agricultural sense, yield means output. You know, and
Yeah.
and I would normally, if I go deeper into this, I'd say, well, okay, yield is output. Measurements of yield are meaningless unless you're somehow referring to the inputs as well that are
Yeah.
in getting that yield.
Yeah.
So you've got to relate outputs to inputs in one way or another. And there's different ways of doing that. None of them are perfect. But one is looking at the energy, the energy put in and the energy value you get out
Mm-hmm.
of crops, and which is a measure of kind of biological efficiency as well. And on that measure, food forests come way higher than almost any other kind of agriculture. Yeah. So yield is a kind of, it's a complex thing,
Mm.
Yeah, it's an extractive word, compared to
Yeah.
the mycelium. The words used in agriculture are very often conquering words. You conquer the land and you take it out, and then
Yeah.
you get most out of it, and that's something I find also very difficult to communicate with people who think like this. Maybe the scientists are the first to communicate with, because they can take in also the extra water that's going in, the extra fertilizer that needs to go in, the extra, everything you need to put into that barren piece of land to extract a harvest, an optimal harvest out of it. So they look at the harvest, but you also have to look at what you have to put into it to get that harvest. And then you see food forests economically, yield-wise, economically quite easily can win after 10 years, because you don't need to water it, you don't need to, the maintenance is less, and that's, I think, let's discuss your conference, your biannual conference. I think that's very very interesting instrument to at least reach science worldwide more and more. And there, I remember 2 years ago, that was a research done in an agricultural plot. Maybe it was 4 years ago, and research done at your place. The gain in biodiversity, for instance, was so much more clear than in what you could say a duo system of agroforestry. Because you have agroforestry and agroforestry, but the simplest form is a tree in grass. And the most complex form is a food forest. And then the biodiversity gain is also a economical value, is becoming an economical value. And I think you are very strong in that. I heard it you saying already when you said, well, I try to sneak in as many species as possible because you want this biodiversity or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a biodiversity crisis as well,
Yeah.
worldwide. So, I want to maximize biodiversity by all means. But the symposium itself, I see actually that has a very kind of mycelial
Yeah.
feel to it, in that the first one was actually going to be in person here in the UK in Devon. And then COVID, it was the year COVID hit. And so it
Yeah, it
went
was too
online.
bad that we wouldn't.
It went online, and it was actually it was much better than I thought it would be. I guess I've been thinking, of the in-person event and organizing all that and stuff, and it seemed almost going second class, moving it online. But actually, it was just as good, maybe different, but just as good online. And so the last one was online, and this year is going to be online as well. And the advantage of it being online is that those mycelial threads can go much further. People don't have to travel to come here. Yeah, of course, an in-person event is different, and of course you have face-to-face conversations and chats with people, which are very different than online. So it's not the same. Of course, it's not the same, but it's still a valuable thing, and I like the way it connects all sorts of people that have an interest in food forestry. So there are obviously practitioners there making their food forests, but also researchers and scientists, like you've said. There are journalists, there are educators. More and more people are using food forest in an educational sense with children and so on. And that's I find that really interesting, kind of linking all these different people up so they know that they can see what's going on, and I find that interesting and inspiring, and so yeah, a very mycelial feel, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's so international. Do different countries solve different parts of the puzzle. I'm wondering.
That's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. I mean, there's more in terms of commercial food forestry. There's more going on in the Netherlands than anywhere else I know of.
Mhm.
So in terms of that aspect, maybe the Netherlands is really strong there. But other aspects, you know, there seem to be going on all over the place, you know, yeah,
Oh, I
discovering
learned a
what's
lot
happening.
in the last time about everything what was happening in the south of America. Because there was this lady that told me, well, you from the north, a lot of your problems are, actually put in the south. The south solves the problems of the north. The south produces a lot of food for the north and has the issues for it. That I found an interesting voice, which I wouldn't have heard if it wasn't for your conference. And the other one was that they could do so quick, they could move these food forests so quickly. I listened to several people from South America. They choose their pioneer. So
Mm.
that's for every different area, there was another one. And that pioneer was then a high tree in 3 years or 2 years, and then off they went. And that made
Yeah.
me jealous.
Yeah,
So
yeah. We
different
can only
parts
be
of the
jealous.
world have different advantages too. Yeah, but that lady did
Yeah.
it very nice. I don't know if you remember. She also said, well, if you want to buy plots near me, I can help you along. I can help you get started because I know it here. I thought it was such a good thing. That's actually what's happening now here in France too. But I'm still in
Yeah.
contact with her.
Yeah, nice. I know a lot of people who made first contacts with other
Yeah,
people at the symposiums, and they've become friends, and they visited each other,
yeah.
that's just great.
I can add something. What you do see is that the mycelium spreads to scientists, to people who want to be busy with food forests on a cultural level, people who are enthusiasts about nature, and we still block with this farmer. We want to reach the farmer in the Netherlands too. You see the same pattern. That is the people who love nature, who love good food, who have some love inside, maybe the mycelium moves with love, that they are entering this mycelium. That's a pattern we see everywhere. Is that also what you see, that people are really worried about things, which really think about the climate, that's the people that it hooks onto?
Um, yeah, I think so. Um, I think you know, you need a certain openness uh, um,
Yeah,
to
love that.
embrace food forestry, because it challenges a lot of preconceptions, and you know, not all people have that openness, obviously, you know, and so um, I think that's important. And of course, we shouldn't forget that you know, food forestry, it originates from the tropics, you know,
Yeah,
and the subtropics, you know, thousands of years ago. So we're using ideas that people worked out, you know, long ago, you know, in other regions, and are just carrying on, you know, doing that. And it's not such a novel thing, you know, in a lot of parts of the world.
Hmm.
yeah,
But it seems that it's a novel thing in the economy where we're living in. So one of the principles of the mycelium is it's living in a shared economy. It's prepared to give away what it's got to the ecosystem, knowing that the ecosystem will take care of the mycelium someday. So it's more of a sharing in front than being in a sort of a competition. That's one of the
Yeah,
principles the mycelium takes.
it is, and that's a challenge in our economies, which
yeah.
are not based on sharing.
Yeah. And how do we break that idea of winning?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have an answer to that. What I would say is, you know, um, our economies um, are g- are getting regular challenges, and you know, the current one, you know, what's going on in the Middle East, is one of those challenges.
Mm.
It does those challenges or crises. They do focus people's attention, you know,
Yeah.
and the way our economies are still so dependent on fossil fuels, you know, that's becoming, if it wasn't obvious before, it's becoming obvious to a lot more people now.
It's the present too, you mean? a crisis like this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think, unfortunately, it often takes crises, you know,
Mm.
to shift people's perceptions. We can argue as persuasively as we can, that food forests are a good idea, but sometimes a crisis will do much more, to shift people in that direction. And that just seems to be the way humans or societies are.
Yeah, and then we need to have our ducks in a row when that happens. That's that's a real English expression, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't translate it in Dutch, but it would be
No,
nice.
but I have an American friend, and he said, "Well, if that happens, you better have your ducks in a
Ducks in a
row."
row.
But okay, but that's where we are in this world. We're a
Yeah.
0 minus 1%, but we are getting ready for after the collapse of current agriculture, after the climate issue becomes so obvious that nobody can deny it anymore. Because you already said it, we would discuss climate today. We're worried. You're worried. We are worried. Are you seeing it already in your because you know about plants? You're busy. You're no longer have a nursery, but you know really about all these food forest plants. Do you see things already?
I do. I see things already. I've seen things in the last 15 years, and that's partly because where we are in the southwest of England, our climate is such that we only need a little bit of warming, and we turn from temperate to subtropical in terms of climate, and we're right on the border of that now.
Yeah.
One of the places where plant behavior can change quite dramatically. In some climates, a degree or two of warming, it won't dramatically change very much in terms of the way plants grow. But where we are, it can do. And what I've seen is that some plants that 30 years ago were reliably herbaceous, so they would die down in winter, they are now evergreen. Almost every winter, they're now evergreen.
Okay.
And even some trees.
But that's interesting in itself that the trees, they change.
Yeah. And like many places, most of our warming has been in winter. So our winters have got much milder, our summers just a little bit hotter overall. And that rise in winter temperatures means a lot less cold. And of course, most fruit trees and fruit bushes need a certain amount of cold in winter before they'll then flower properly in the spring. And sometimes they're not getting it now.
Like a certain apple varieties, they really need so many days of cold, otherwise they do nothing. That kind of examples are you?
I mean, apples are the one, actually, it's been most obvious because they need more cold than a lot of the other tree crops like pears or plums. Apple varieties, what we've seen with apple varieties here is that they show very obvious signs of not being well adapted to the climate we have now by flowering twice. They flower in April, and then they flower a second time in September. And so they don't flower very well either time because they try to do it twice. And so you still get a bit of a crop, but not very good. And that's a sure sign that it's a variety that's no longer adapted to the climate we have. So we've started regrafting some of our apple trees to varieties, mostly French varieties actually, that need less cold than English varieties. And I guess that might happen with other crops as well in the future.
Yeah, where I live, it is still cold in the winter, but we have these spells in the summer of like 40 plus degrees for 2 weeks in a row. So here, especially the summer, that's an issue now. So
I mean, in our part of England, we don't tend to get such high temperatures as that. In the London area or southeast, they can get near to 40. But we don't tend to get that where we are. We're quite close to the sea, so that maritime influence, depresses temperatures a bit. So we haven't had to deal with quite as many issues. But obviously, if temperatures get into the 40s, most plants hate that.
Yeah, they stop. They stop photosynthesis. They don't do anything.
Exactly.
But people don't realize that kind of details are the devil. That's what is a danger also to our food supply. Because if
Yeah.
something like this happens with corn or something like this happens with grain, then suddenly you have a real big problem. Or with
Yeah.
rice, we depend so much on 4 or 5 varieties of rice or grain or corn. Nobody realizes that
Mm.
that's so dangerous, actually.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, it is. There was there are always reports coming out, about climate, the crisis, and what effect it'll have. But there was an interesting one in England that came out, I know, 2 or 3 months ago, and it was a report made by the security services in Britain.
wow,
So not some hippie group, but
no,
the security services, and they highlighted the risk to food security, the risk of society breakdown, and they recommended a big move to regenerative agriculture. And this report, our government tried to hide it
Mm,
because they thought it was a bit too radical,
yeah.
but actually that's how it is.
is it
And
ook?
and these people,
Yeah,
so I think some people are aware that actually, the issues could be huge,
yeah.
in the next 10 or 15 years. So we're not talking a huge time ahead. And yeah, I mean, we all know, food forests are highly resilient systems,
Yeah.
and they need to be part of that conversation for sure.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
for them it's a bit strange. There's some kind of strange factor in it that, producing food with trees doesn't connect with their normal life. Why is this idea so hard to grasp?
I don't know. I mean, people are, you know, everybody knows about orchards,
Yeah.
orchards of
Yeah.
apples or orchards of pears and so on. And everybody eats fruits. So, everybody's eating tree crops, more or less everybody, already. But for some reason, yeah, kind of making those systems much more diverse seems to be quite a challenge. And yeah, don't know why.
Climate will help us, I fear.
Right.
Um,
I mean, one of the issues here is that winter storms are getting stronger.
yeah.
Um, and that's going to affect, of course, everybody in the west of Europe. And actually, it's been quite shocking this winter for me to read and watch what's been happening in places like Portugal, where they've
Yeah.
had really
So
extreme
much rain.
storms that they've never had before,
No.
which have got pushed south rather than hitting England like they usually do. But those extreme storms mean windbreaks are so much more important. They were always important here, but they're going to be even more important to try and take that initial blow of the storm winds. But also, it's been this winter has been very wet here, probably
Yeah.
the wettest winter on record, I think, in Devon, where I am here. And the ground's been so wet and become so soft that then, you know, if you get all that rain and then you get a big storm,
Yes.
trees just blow over. They lose their wind firmness because the ground is so soft.
Yeah.
So that, rather than extreme heat, it's that. It's here. It's
Yeah.
rather
It's
that.
also the winter. That's what you say.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. We had here also, we have a lot of walnuts here, and there's one orchard's just blown away for half
right,
of it. Poof. Just
right.
because of, the same combination. We had it
Yeah,
too, and the Netherlands had it too. It was very wet in the Netherlands too. It's not only the summers that get hotter, it's also the winters that get wetter, and you have these weather situations that stay put for a while on a same
right.
spot. That's a new thing. I don't know that from before, but now I know what I wanted to ask you. Um, I think if I read your books and things properly, you think nuts is a very interesting new product to promote in our diet, because that is also a way to to go into the world of the other people.
Mm.
That's
Yeah,
through the food chain, to say we need to eat more nuts, we need to produce more nuts here instead of in Turkey because they grow very well. And I think nuts have a special place for you. Do you have a feeling of progress there, or do you think it's also the same?
I
Um,
I do have a feeling of progress. There's a lot of in England, a lot of farmers have been planting particularly walnuts because they can see the economic value. Now, I mean, economic forecasting, personally, I do not regard that as a science. Uh, I regard that as almost like licking your finger and putting it up in the wind and hoping, because economic forecasts are useless if Russia invades Ukraine or if the Middle East blows up like it has now and energy prices all change. So all your forecasts for the next 10 or 20 years are completely wrong. It only takes one of those crises
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
But even by those, fairly conservative economic forecasts, walnuts are a good thing to be planting in Britain now. So a lot of farmers have been doing that. And again, that's it's a way in. A first tree crop. I've seen this with various farmers. A first tree crop, it's breaking that barrier of realizing what trees can do and what trees can be and how you can get lots of other benefits from them as well. And once they've got into one tree crop, then it's actually much easier to then try and persuade them, well, it'd be good if you diversified, and actually you could have this tree, or you could have this tree underplanted with something else, and then gradually kind of move them towards a food forest type planting. But that first step is the biggest one, I think.
Yeah.
And now you're talking about walnuts. What other crops are very interesting right now as well?
I mean, as you said, I'm very into nuts. We have a apart from those sites I mentioned earlier, we have a site with nuts in, and I grow lots of different types of nuts. So heart nut or Japanese walnut is one of those, which is a fantastic nut, crops really well, and of course things like hazelnut and so on. Almond doesn't do very well here because we're too near the Atlantic Ocean. It's too humid for almonds. So the further east you go across Britain and into the rest of Europe as well, almonds tend to do better, of course. And then, apart from nuts, one of the more unusual crops that's actually been doing really well for us is persimmons. And there's a lot of interest in those as well at the moment.
That's the kaki fruit, isn't it?
Yeah.
For people who don't know what a persimmon
The
is.
Diospirals.
Sure.
Yes, we need to talk to a lot of people in this podcast. So sometimes we have to explain the word. Yeah, they do well here too. And they sell well here too. So people discover them and know they have to keep them till they're almost like too good to go. Then they're good. And you have to learn people to eat them. Yeah.
I'm looking at the time, and we're all on our way to an hour already, Marieke, like 15 minutes. So this is just the moment that I ask you, do you have a good question still for Martin at this moment?
No, not so much as that. I want to know. You used to have a nursery. You stopped with a nursery, and you're only selling seeds now. Is that because it's easier to sell seeds, and this is what you want to continue with, or is it also because you think seeds are a very interesting thing, also for like Mark Shepard says, to do things the shun, the whatever, that we need to sow more seeds for trees.
Utter neglect that thing.
Yes, that one. Yeah.
I mean, we've always
sold seeds,
saved and sold seed. Seeds are great because of the genetic diversity you get of growing from seed. But of course, when you're talking tree crops, most trees are grafted. There's no diversity or very little diversity. You might have a few varieties, and so there's always a bit of a risk going down that route only, of having single variety or grafted tree crops. So I am interested in seed, but the nursery business, I mean, I ran that for about 25 years or so, and I just felt like passing that on to somebody else, and so I don't actually have to work 14-hour days anymore.
Yeah, like I do.
So, which has been very nice, actually. So that passed over to somebody who used to work for us. So she's running that nursery now as a new business. It'd be her business, and she's still growing all the sorts of things that we used to grow. And of course, until Brexit, we used to grow and send plants all over Europe. And now, of course, it's only in this country. And although from our perspective that was a shame we couldn't send abroad, it has, I think, maybe helped a little bit in the impetus of getting other nurseries going in other countries, which
Yeah.
of course is great, and if you can get the plants you want from a nursery in your own country rather than some other country, that's obviously better. But while we were growing plants and sending across Europe, there were very few other nurseries in the rest of Europe growing the sorts of plants we used to grow, and now there are more and more. So that's fantastic. But yeah, I just felt like I mean, running a nursery is lovely, and I love growing plants from cuttings or from seed or whatever. But it is relentless, running a nursery. And I thought, well, okay, I'd be happy moving that on to somebody else, giving me a
Yeah.
bit more time to do other stuff or to do more of something else, So that's felt good.
Yeah, but creating seeds is work too, but it's less relentless.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just drying. Okay.
yeah.
And the seeds are also only sent to UK or
They are at the moment. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
there are moves to integrate Britain back nearer to the EU in terms
Yeah.
of moving that stuff around. So that may change, hopefully.
Yeah. I hope so too, because I saw some interesting seeds. Yes. Well,
Yeah.
that was my last question. I wanted to know the
Hmm.
details about that. And Frank, do you have a last interesting mycelium question for us?
Yeah. Well, if you
Yeah,
take
I guess.
the food forest movement is still in its early stages, and there's a lot going on underground, to take the mycelium parallel. So that's growing. What is it? That's my question. What is it that most people can't see yet, but that's happening?
Um, interesting. I think people can't easily see actually how popular it is becoming,
Yeah.
food forestry. In just in Britain, there are, I estimate, between 5 and 10,000 food forests. Most of those you never hear about because it's people's private garden or private bit of land. They don't publicize it. They're just doing what they're doing. And so there's certainly, in terms of number of projects, there's certainly more food forests going on than any other type of agroforestry in Britain, farm scale or whatever. But it is a little bit underground,
Yeah.
because
It is
it's,
underground. Yeah.
people don't see it. People don't realize that actually it's actually becoming quite common. Um, yeah, I mean, how to get around that? I'm not sure really. I guess more exposure in media. Things like there are quite a lot of kind of food forest related podcasts now and YouTube channels and stuff like that. So people are getting their information that way. They're not getting it from mainstream media very much, is what I'd say.
So
But maybe it's the first lesson we always hear from Wouter, that being patient is one of the key
key virtues of
approaches
the
to
mycelium.
starting a food forest. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe sitting on our hands is already a good thing to do.
yeah, I get that, and being patient is good, but it's becoming more difficult. With the
Yeah,
urgency of the
I
climate
feel that.
crisis,
I
it's
feel that.
becoming more difficult to do that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So
So maybe yeah, never waste a good crisis, and the things that are happening in the Middle East may speed things up. So who
Yeah,
knows?
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because we do need to speed up. We
Yeah,
need to make this
absolutely.
bigger.
I mean, they're talking about, the supply of fertilizer being really restricted
Oh
because of
yes.
what's happening
Yes.
in the Middle East. And so farmers
That's
won't
right.
have their fertilizer, you know, and so that's certainly in this country, it's making people think maybe we should grow more of our own food,
Mm.
Yeah.
as not just personally, but as a country. Maybe we should
Yeah.
grow more of our own food because our government hasn't been an objective for a long
Yeah.
time to
Yeah.
grow a lot of food for ourselves. But actually, this kind of crisis shows, oh, actually, yeah,
Yeah.
Maybe we
Not
perhaps it's a
only
good
more
idea,
guns.
start planting those trees.
Start planting those
Exactly.
trees. Let's end on this happy future note. And
Yeah.
thank you very much for this great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks.